So last night, the state of Arkansas executed Marcel Williams and Jack Harold Jones on the same night. This is the first time since 2000 that there has been a double execution. And in 2000, it was Texas. Texas was the state that put two people to death. Last night was not uneventful, to say the least. There were complaints that the first inmate to be put to death was actually struggling in during the execution. More precisely, they're saying that it looked like as though he was gasping for air. Because of that, there was an initial stay that was passed by the judicial system there in Texas, in Arkansas rather, but it didn't last. They came back very shortly, 45 minutes later, and put the next inmate to death. This is in light of Governor Asa Hutchinson's Republican governor of Arkansas desire to put 8 men to death before a prescription, a cocktail that they use in the execution expires at the end of April. And so in almost an unprecedented fashion, he streamlined and fast-tracked the execution of eight people that were on death row. And so far, they've carried out I believe 3, if not 4 of those executions. Pat, this really goes into the conversation about the death penalty in the first place. Why, as a civilized, quote unquote, civilized nation, why are we still continue to pursue and execute people? Number one, pursue the death penalty and execute people, to be more precise. But then number two, you look at the European Union. You can't even be a part of the European Union if you are a nation that still carries out the death penalty. Why in America are we so obsessed with the death penalty such that we're going to fast track the execution of 8 men, and one of whom had DNA evidence that they were not even willing to review?
Yeah, it's pretty insane. The fact that these drugs were set to expire and it's not easy for them to get more because they have to go to Europe to do so. And of course, European companies are not willing to do something because they are not in support of the death penalty themselves. And this also really just cuts at the constitutionality of the death penalty, because if this is not cruel and unusual punishment, I don't know what is.
Right, and I think it's all levels and measures of what you consider cruel and unusual. For some of the people that were there, some of the journalists that actually reported that the first inmate was gasping for air, to them that was cruel and unusual. To the court system, it wasn't. And the problem was that they had a hard time. It took them 45 minutes to find the vein that they needed in the neck of the first inmate because he was so overweight, and that became arduous in itself. So 45 minutes for them sticking him, 45 minutes to find the place for the needle to go in. Like, I mean, and this is probably a bad comparison, but if it takes my phlebotomist more than 2 tries to get a needle into me, I'm losing it, right? But imagine compound the pressure of this is your execution. You're dying. You've had your last meal, and it takes them 45 minutes to find your vein. Then you're gasping for air, and now you're a second inmate looking at being aware of this because your lawyers are filling you in about this, and you're looking at a cruel. I mean, it's obscene in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's 3 drugs to that cocktail. So the first one puts you to sleep, the second one paralyzes you, and then the third causes cardiac arrest, right? So if you're missing one of those drugs in that cocktail, that's pretty important because you could be experiencing a burning sensation and you're fully conscious during it, but you can't speak, you can't make any claims, so all you can do is gasp for air.
And this is what they're saying, that Marcel Williams and Jack Harold demonstrated signs of consciousness, right? And so is there any humane way to actually execute somebody? I mean, that's really the question. Yeah, it seems like, they just fall asleep, but now we're at the point where we're in such a hurry, right? So we're speaking to the cultural problem here, the morality problem. We're in such a hurry to kill these people that we're willing to expose them to an inhumane death.
Is there a humane way of killing? Probably not. There's a gas known as hypoxia, which will actually create some euphoric sensations before someone passes away from oxygen deprivation. But the problem with that is if people can just hold their breath, of course, breathing is involuntary at some point, but for minutes on end, you can be just choosing not to breathe in that gas. So the fact that you have to participate in your own execution, I think that even that method, which is the most humane thing we can think of, it would be cruel and unusual.
What bothers me the most about this story is Asa Hutchinson, who uses religious terminology to justify it. He's making it seem as though this is part of his moral responsibility to carry out state-sanctioned executions, right? And he uses his religious, his Christian faith almost as a justification as to why he's doing this, because he has a responsibility to as governor and a responsibility to God. And once you enter that into the equation, to me, Pat, it doesn't complicate the situation to me. It just exposes the hypocrisy, right? The level with which these people who claim to be Christian or whatever version of Christianity they have, they're so ready and willing to use God as a justification for state-sanctioned killings, when even if you take their own religion at their own word, this is something that Christians should not be behind, but Christians are the number one people behind this.
And of course, we live in a secular nation, so that argument should be null and void to begin with. And it's most important when lives are at stake here, potentially innocent lives too, because we know that 4% of people on death row are actually innocent of the crime.
That's the last thing I'm going to say about this, right? So even if you take this, let's start here. You're right. This religious justification that Asa Hutchinson and the other people use should be completely outside of the conversation. It should not even come into the conversation, but they inject it in the conversation. And if you're going to inject it in the conversation, then people like me have to call out the hypocrisy that, of all people, religious people, Christians should be suspicious or against the death penalty for many reasons, least of which is the fact that, like you said, the number of innocent people who actually get executed should be completely unacceptable. Whether your morality is based on religion or just your own personal morality, it should be completely unacceptable. But yet it's the same people time and time again who use it as a justification as to why they should carry out these executions.
And I think the innocence argument is the top argument against the death penalty, because we can have a conversation as to whether someone deserves that, or these theoretical discussions of does that punishment fit the crime. But if we're executing the wrong people, then that just goes out the window. That should be at the top of the list.
That should be at the top of the list, and unfortunately it's not. And so we've seen a streamlined execution process in the state of Arkansas, some of which have led to what some journalists are considering inhumane deaths.